Okay, good morning, everybody, and Chag Sameach. Okay, today we're going to focus in on the issue of simcha during aveilut. The first Gemara we already actually did, but we'll look at it again a little closer, and then we'll talk about some of the different conceptual frameworks in which simcha can work, and then we'll talk about some of the halacha l'maaseh stuff as well. So the Gemara in Daf Kaf Bet says, "Al kol hametim kulan nichnas lebeit hamishte lachar 30 yom." For all the relatives who die after 30 yom, we can go closely lebeit hamishte. Aviv v'imo, for a parent, lachar 12 chodesh. Amar Rav Bar Chana ulesimchat merei, for a particular type of simcha, which we don't know how to define now, but we'll continue to define it a little bit. For simcha of collegiality, maybe is a word, or being friendly, something like that. Then you can do it. Here it says, the first source says 12 months, and this one says 30 days. So the Gemara says, Kasha, we have a problem, right? And that we don't know how to resolve that. A Meimar taught like this. We have three sources. We have one source that says you can only go in for your parents for 12 months, another source that says for 30 days, and another source which is defined as simchat mereu. Then we have a third source, or in katan aveilut, we have a third source that says you can go in immediately. Somewhere it says v'atanya l'simchat shloshim l'mereu shloshim. We have a fourth source that says for simcha 30 days and for mereu also shloshim. Then the Gemara says lo kasha kan ba'arisuta kan bepuranata. This seems to be the final line. Arisuta, if you remember, we translated last time as if you're initiating, as opposed to puranata, which we said is if you're reciprocating, right? No, it's if you're initiating a meal, then you shouldn't initiate a meal within 30 days. But if you're reciprocating, then even if you were reciprocating, then if someone already made the meal for you and the expectation is that you're supposed to pay them back, then you're allowed to do it even within 30 days. So those are the sources. So if I have to conclude from this Gemara, I would say, probably as the Rush says, but then the Rush adds something. Al kol hameitim, right? The Rush again is a Ashkenazi posek who ends up in Spain, right? In the early 14th century, like 13th century. Al kol hameitim nichnas lebeit hamishte. Sorry, someone's not muted. I'm not sure who it is, but someone's not muted.
Say.
Okay, I just muted Seth. I thought you were kayaking or something. Okay.
Sorry, I'm off the river.
Okay, fine. I thought it'd be cooler if you were on the river. Okay, I hope everything's okay. So Al kol hameitim nichnas lebeit hamishte lachar lamed yom v'al aviv v'imo lachar yud bet chodesh. Okay, so he quotes the first part of the Braita, right? You can go into a beit hamishte after 30 days. For your parents after a month, after 12 months. Which you can start going to parties again after the year of aveilut. But people sometimes think that when you stop saying Kaddish after 11 months, you can do this, but that's the unique thing in Kaddish, the 11 months. The 12 months that's when you're not supposed to go to parties. But for simchat mereu, which we're going to define in a moment as reciprocating, you can go in immediately. That's if you're reciprocating. In other words, if the expectation is that you're going to, right, the society is based on the fact that you come to my party, I come to your party. So if people are expecting you to show up at their party, you can't not go. So then you could go in, and the Rush says l'alter immediately. Once he passes like the end of the Gemara, you can go in immediately. Aval barisata, if you're initiating the party, then lachar 30 yom, you can only do it after 30 days. Adkan, that's basically the end of the Gemara. That's great. In other words, initiating the party, if there's an expectation that you're supposed to come, then you can go, right? Immediately. That sounds like even in Shiva. You could go, but for Arisuta, lachar 30 yom. But then the Rush throws in a monkey wrench, and that's the monkey wrench that we need to think about and explore. He says, even though reciprocation is mutter, and it's even mutter immediately, right? In other words, you could go ostensibly even during Shiva. Sorry, 1 second. Right. You can even go in during Shiva, ostensibly, right? He actually doesn't make it 100% clear. He does say, though, you can go in immediately. Right? So he does. Yeah, I'm sorry. He does make it clear. You can go in immediately, and if there's an expectation you could come, that would be great. But then he says, but no matter what the case is, whether it's reciprocating or initiating, for a parent, you can only go lachar yud bet chodesh. Now that could tell us something about what the nature of the aveilut of Shnei Masar Chodesh is. It could, that we discussed last time, or it could tell us something about what simcha is, right? Why should it be? Let's just ask ourselves for a minute. Why should it be that reciprocation is mutter immediately before we get to this last line of the rush? Why would you say that reciprocation is mutter? So I would have said, that it's a davar avid. In other words, basically the expectation is such, just like I can go to business if I'm going to lose a big business deal, or I can go to work even during Shiva, just like in Chol Moed, I can go if I'm going to miss a big business deal. So to here, if the expectation is that I'm supposed to show up so that I would, I'm allowed to come, right? In other words, I'm going to lose something. I'm going to lose the potential loss of our friendship, or being part of the group, or being part of the culture, whatever it is, would allow me to go immediately. But if that's the case, then why in Yud Bet Chodesh would I not be allowed to do it for a parent? Aren't the laws of davar avid, aren't the laws of potential loss or realized loss, aren't they relevant also to Yud Bet Chodesh? So like I said, it could tell you something about Yud Bet Chodesh, that maybe Yud Bet Chodesh we saw, it doesn't as much have a source. But if that's the case, it should go the opposite direction. If it doesn't have a source Yud Bet Chodesh, if it's only, we don't forget the person for 12 months or something like that, then I would say, expect us to be more makil. Here we're actually being more machmir when it comes to Yud Bet Chodesh. So this is a strange shita. And it makes us kind of rethink, it makes us think about more, what's the nature of this going into a simcha merei? Like, why would it be usher? So I don't want to answer that question yet, but I want to just think about it. In other words, this really throws a monkey wrench in. Right? In other words, it's hard to imagine that if a brother died, chas v'shalom, you'd be able to go into, in other words, if the culture is that you're invited me, I invite you. Again, I don't have a good way to say it quickly, but in other words, the reciprocal relationship would be mutter during Shiva, but for a parent, you'd have to send it all the way till after Yud Bet Chodesh. Hard to understand that shita, but again, maybe it's reflective, and maybe it's an indicator of something bigger in terms of understanding what this din is of simchat merei, why yes sometimes and why no sometimes. Okay, so let's hold that off for a minute. I'm not 100% sure I'll be able to answer that question, but I want to show you there are other opinions. The Meiri, on the same Gemara, right? He calls it a chov. He says, Yesh matirin bo tashihi chov, right? This is, I'm sorry, and the printer or the sheets. Danny, I apologize. Here, let me just go get it for Danny 1 second. So the Meiri, which is the third source on the page, in the Beit HaBechira, he says, Yesh matirin ba'otashi chov, right? So note 1, he calls it a chov. He says that the nature of puranata is that I owe you something. Right, again, this is going to be hard to define halacha lamaisa, what exactly this means for us. But he says, matirin ba'otashi chov, af ba'av ve'im, af avem, lachar shiva, sheme'achar shechovu, ein ra'ui lomar shiamtin ze'et simchato, it's inappropriate that this person should hold off on his simcha if he owes it to the other person, or that it can uproot to pay back. Or it's basically, halacha holds in very serious, gives very serious consideration to the fact that you have personal obligations. If you have a personal obligation to someone, so pay them back, right? So here you see the contrast, by the way, in the other direction, because here he says, not only does it not apply to Yud Bet Chodesh, it applies, lachar Shiva. So again, he doesn't say like the rush, like I intimated in the rush, that maybe it's even within Shiva, right? The rush talked about, if you look at the previous source, he says, mutar likanas la'alter. You can come in maybe even during Shiva. Here he says, it's lachar Shiva, but it's lachar Shiva across the board. So maybe that gives us kind of like a different, he's more makil, right? He doesn't say you have to even wait shloshim for a parent, right? He says, so again, this raises the question of what is this din of going in, right? Again, what is this din of reciprocity that you can do it? Is it, if it's a davar avid, then it should be mutter even during Shiva. Here we have the Rush who's saying lachar Yud Bet Chodesh, even reciprocity doesn't work. You have the Meiri who says everybody is achar Shiva. Shiva wouldn't allow reciprocity to take place, right? So again, it raises the question. I don't have a good operating definition, conceptual definition of what this means. But I understand that there's definitely something at play here. Again, it could be an indicator of what Yud Bet Chodesh is in the rush. But I think it's more of an indicator of that somehow reciprocity has its limits, right? In other words, it's not a heter goref. You can just do whatever you want. In other words, personal obligations are relevant, but personal obligations have to be attenuated also by aveilut. But again, I don't have a good operating definition, but I did want to show you that even within the Gemara, how you read the Gemara is basically subject to debate because there are 4 opinions in the Gemara about what we do. In the end, the Gemara, everybody adopts this definition, including the Shulchan Aruch. We'll see later on today. Shulchan Aruch adopts this definition, but it's not 100% clear in the Rishonim at least whether it applies to parents, and when it applies to non-parents, or even when it applies to parents, that reciprocity is okay, but it might even be la'alter immediately or only al shiva. Okay, so all those shitas appear. You will note that the Rambam, when the Rambam quotes this halacha, he takes the normative position. He doesn't take the extreme position of the Rush or the very, very makil position of the Meiri. The Rambam takes their position. Simchat mereyut shayach chayav lifroa utam miyad. You need to pay it back. In other words, there's a reciprocal. Right. In other words, you have to pay it back now. Obviously, if you can. If in other words, it's your week, right? In other words, again, they hosted last Thursday or whatever. You hosted last Thursday before the death happened. They're supposed to host next Thursday, and there's an expectation that you're going to come, and the invitation's already out. That's the miyad, right? Chayav lifroa utam miyad. By the way, I always think about this concept of weddings. Like often, none of us like to admit it, but we all know it's true that we invite people to our weddings because they invited us to their weddings. We invite people to our bar mitzvahs because they invited, and they'd be insulted if I didn't come because after all, they came to my bar mitzvah. Yeah. I wonder. I don't see we should poskim today saying that's chayav lifroa, but I really think that might be the chayav lifroa in some ways. In other words, and then maybe even during shiva you have to show up, right? If the expectation is that. But again, that's lifroa miyan means there's a wedding invitation on the table, or there's an invitation on the table. You have to show up. Right, this could totally be in the case of business dealings all the time, right? He came to your convention, you have to go to his convention. So says the Rambam, mutar la'asot miyad la'achar shiva. Okay, aval eno chayav lifor'a. If you don't have to pay it up, asur likanes ba'ad shloshim yom. So again, for the standard relative, if you don't have to pay it back, you can go after shloshim. But medvar moim b'shar kol hametim. Aval avivi imo ben kach uben kach lo yikanes l'simchat mereyut. Oh, I'm sorry, ad shtei masar chodesh. I'm sorry. So the Rambam does pass him like the Rush. Right, he says, he does say, I made a mistake. I thought he was taking middle position. My mistake, I didn't read it properly. So the Ram is like the Rush, whether it's chayav toli for miyad, you still don't go in after shtei masar chodesh. So it's hard to understand this exactly, right? It's just a complicated position to swallow. Again, it might be, right? Says the Ravid, right? B'shar meitim ad yud ben chodesh haram l'simchat mitzvah ad shloshim yom kishar meitim. If it's a simchat mitzvah, the Ravid introduces a new category altogether, which we haven't seen yet, which doesn't appear in the Gemara, called simchat mitzvah. What is simchat mitzvah? So that we have to see. So again, just to summarize what we're up to right now, we have a Gemara. The Gemara talks about a differentiation at the end between arisuta and puranata, right? When you have to pay back as opposed to when you're initiating. When it comes to paying back, the Gemara says that it seemingly differentiates between la'alter immediately and shloshim yom, right? The Rush and the Rambam introduced that distinction is only regarding a spouse, child, a sibling. But when it comes to a parent, that shloshim yom is not relevant. That does not appear at all in the Gemara. Mm-hmm. By contrast, notwithstanding the Gemara's reading that the shloshim yom applies, but mutar l'keles la'alter, the Meiri, again, I don't know how the Meiri reads exactly the Gemara. He says yesh matirin ba'ota shu chov. Right? In other words, Shiva is, in other words, for parents, not only is you have to not wait during the Chodesh, you don't even have to wait the Shloshim, right? You can just wait Shiva, right? It's not appropriate. So we have 3 approaches basically to how to address this, to read this Gemara. Fine. Says the Tur, and here the Bach raises a 4th possibility. Listen closely to the Tur's reading of the Gemara. Amar Rav Huna, simchat mereyut mutar likanas la'alter. That's what Rav Huna said in the Gemara. You can go in immediately. Perish kemosha osim re'im zeim zeh. Just like friends do. That's what simchat mereyut means. It doesn't mean dancing. It means what friends do with one another. Zeh hayom v'chazin v'ochlim zeim zeh machar. Right. That's what we call the home and home series. Right, in hockey. Right. Mutar miyad. Afal pi shochlim v'shotim zeim zeh. Ein bo simcha. Finally, he says something very interesting. He doesn't say this is a din of davar avad. He says this is not defined as simcha. Kemo b'chubat chatanim. B'medvarim amurim shetzarich lifroa yomo. Kigon shekvar achal imreyav. That's only if you already ate at his house, or he already ate at your house. V'gia yom ha'piraon b'imei avlo. Aval asur lahatchil la'asot sudat mereyut ad lachar yom, ad lachar lamed yom. Right? You can't do a simchat mereyut. In other words, if you haven't If it's not a reciprocal thing, but it's already, you're the initiator or he's the initiator, you can't start. Yet so far it sounds like the Rambam.
Yeah.
Says the Bach. Amar Afuna l'simchat marayot mutar likanes la'altar. Mashma milashon Rabbeinu midichtiv v'higia yom ha'piraon b'yemei avlo da'afilu toch shiva mutar. Kevan shehigia zmano achshav. So he says what I suggested before, that it's not only, you only have to wait until Shiva, this actually breaks Shiva completely, right? Where it's, so again, that's the way I read the Rush before, right? The altar means the altar, right? It means immediately. Remember, the Torah is the son of the Rush. So mutar, I read in the Rush before, mutar likanes la'altar. In case you were wondering if that means lachar Shiva, he says that even means, the Bach's reading even during Shiva. So again, what's important in the Torah is that he says, there's kind of a different definition. He says we have a world that's usher, and we maintain that world that's usher. It's not that we suspend the world that's usher because of Davra Avad, right? No, it's happening right now, and you can't push it off. The invitation's already out, so you have to show up. He says, basically, when you're doing it for reciprocity, it's a different definition. It's not simcha. In other words, your motivation is part of what enables you to go or not go. Do you follow that? It's not the objective reality. It's your motivation. Since your motivation is only to be reciprocal, to pay back the favor. There was the guy you had him at your house last week, and now he's expecting you to come to your house. That is not simcha, right? Okay. That's what we call obligation. So we have two models here, right? Do you see them in the tour?
Yeah.
Right? Ein zeh simcha. So we have two models.
Rabbi, it's like the old joke that when you were invited to a shul dinner or to a school dinner, that there's no simcha involved, so you can go during.
Exactly. We saw this actually in Rav Moshe's thing last week. Remember Rav Moshe, we had the woman who the husband wanted to invite the woman the husband wanted the wife to go to the shul dinner, right? We talked about that last week in Rav Moshe's tshuva. Right? And Rav Moshe said maybe the wife has a responsibility. Remember to talk, in terms of kibbud av, right? If it's a din of kavod av, then maybe the kavod of the husband comes before, or kavod of spouse. We go either direction. But here, as exactly. Sometimes we don't like to go to dinners because we're going out of obligation, right? So dafka, that would enable you to go to the dinner, right? Because it's not a din of simcha at all.
Everybody's working.
Right, exactly. Everybody's working. What I'm interested in though is exploring is that once you extract the motivation as being the fundamental factor, does that mean that anything could go out at the dinner? That's totally unclear to me. If simchat marayut is mutter, but when you're being poreah chov. So what if there's music at the dinner? You're allowed to go to that? Ostensibly, yes. Which we don't look at the content of what's going on as much as your motivation, right? Again, this wouldn't explain the 12-month, non-12 months thing, but it does give us a different conceptual framework than I think the one we were used to, right? We expected, right, to talk about what's mutter and what's usher to go to based on what's going on there, right? Whether it's a brit milah or shav brachos, we'll see all this in the next few minutes. But here he talks about motivation. If motivation is an obligation, then how far would we stretch that? That's unclear to me. Here, clearly, if he's expecting you to come, or there's an expectation you would come, that's already an obligation, right? Or it doesn't trump the issue of simcha. It's that the simcha is not there, because simcha is very, very subjective quality, right? Again, this doesn't at all appear in the Gemara, but simcha is a very subjective quality. Are you going to be misamech or not? And if it's a subjective quality, then hey, if you're not going there to be samech, and you might not be samech because you hate going to dinners, then maybe it's mutter. Okay, so we have two models basically that are on the table right now. Again, with one question, which again I maybe we'll get the answer. Right, one thing we have this din in the Gemara. The din of the Gemara is obligation is mutter. How is it mutter? Ostensibly, it's mutter la'alter, which the Bach reads in the Torah means immediately. Most Rishonim read lachar shifa, and for Avi v'Imo, we saw some people say lachar shloshim, and some people say lachar yud ben chodesh. Right? In other words, it could be only 12 months later. We don't understand exactly how to explain that, but what's most interesting is this line of the Torah that obligation is not a din of simcha, where it's your subjective thing that defines what allows you to go. If you're going out of a sense of obligation, that would matter it. And ostensibly, that would be a heter goref. It would be a totally wide heter, as opposed to, I think what we started off thinking, which is that no, there's a din of simcha, but that din of simcha is suspended because it's davar avid, right? You're going to lose the opportunity, right? It's an opportunity loss, just like business is an opportunity loss. It doesn't mean you can do whatever you want, right? It's not your motivation that makes a difference, but we just don't see this as simcha right now, right? Or it's for you for this moment, but still the place would be of simcha. Okay, that's one source. However, there's another source altogether that we need to think about. right? There's a Gemara a little later on Daf Kafav that says Amar Rav Papa Tana Ba'avel Rabati, which is apparently some set of Braito that they had floating around in the Tannaitic period, right? Masechet aveilut. Avel lo yaniach tinok betoch cheiko mipnei shemevi'o liyidei schok v'nimtza mitganeh al habriot. This is very, very fascinating. An avel is not allowed to hold a baby because the baby will make you crack up, it will make you laugh, and that will be inappropriate in the eyes of people. Or it's people, again, what does that mean? By the way, this is possible. If you just skip down to the very end where we get to the Shulchan Aruch, you'll see in Siman Shin Tzadi Aleph on page 4, right? The Shulchan Aruch Paskins, this is how he starts. Avel Asr B'Simcha. Lefichach lo yikach tinok b'cheiko kol shiva shema yavo lidei schok. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't quote that it's going to be mitganeh al habriot, that it's inappropriate, right? Sometimes we go to shivas and we walk out and we say that was really inappropriate what was going on there, right? That's what the Gemara talks about. Here, the Shulchan Aruch just talks about it in the context of we just don't want you laughing, right? We just don't want you laughing. We don't want you misamech. In other words, it's not only about your motivation, right? What if you're picking up the baby because the baby's crying? So again, I would tell you people, yeah, of course you can pick up the baby because the baby's crying, but that's not clear in the Shulchan Aruch. Maybe just the notion of bring you l'dei schok, or it's what's going to happen objectively is a problem. And we don't care, what your motivation is. Even if your motivation is something else, we don't care because we want to protect you long term, or we're interested in what your long term meaning within the shiva, within the context of the right, within the context of the aveilut. So again, this doesn't go on beyond shloshim, of course, or beyond shiva, but still note that appears here, and so we have to ask ourselves again: is this a din of motivation? Is this a din of objective simcha? How do all these dinim play out? So how do we test this? Right? How can we test what the exact din is? So here we could ask ourselves, what if I was able to go to a place, forget about my motivation for a moment, what if I was able to go to a place of simcha, but not be mesamech? Right? That would be the easiest way to test what the nature of this din is. If the din is, we don't want you in a context of simcha, because you might come to be mesamech or something like that, that's one thing. What if I go out of my way to make sure that I'm not going to be mesamech or be sameach? Would that be mutter? So if it's a din of the objective reality, like picking up a baby, then I would say, yeah, you shouldn't be there, right? I know you're not going there because you want, right? I know your context. On the other hand, if it's like the place itself, we don't want you in that context. Then even if you're not planning to be mesamech, or even if you could sit outside, so to speak, that would be an issue. So that is the machlokes rishonim. That's the first indicator for me. So here I'm going to quote it. It's in the Tosfot as well. We'll see the Tosfot a little later, but I just cut this part out because it's only at the end of Tosfot. It's just a one-liner in Tosfot. But here I quoted because the Ramban in his Torah, Torah Ta'adam, you remember the Ramban had this essay on aveilut called Torah Ta'adam, which is in the Kitvei HaRamban, which many of you got for your bar mitzvahs, like I did, and never, ever, ever, ever opened. But until maybe you got to college and you saw that he has a whole chapter there on the suffering servant passage. Or maybe one time you read the disputation, his version of the disputation, which is in that 2-volume set. Professor Chevelle, Rabbi Chevelle, who's Simi Chevelle's grandfather and Isaac Chevelle's father. So he, spent his life basically doing the Ramban, and he printed these 2 volumes on, of the Kitvei HaRamban. That's where the Ramban has his essay on when he gets there, it's Israel, and when he gets to Jerusalem, right? Because we are in Yerushalayim, and he says, I should have brought it and read it to you from the Kitvei HaRamban. He says, I finally got to Yerushalayim after, right? You remember he had the Barcelona disputation in 1263. I've told you this many times. And then, right, we have the Ramban's version where, of course, he won the disputation. But in the last 60 years or so, we found the Latin version where he didn't exactly win the disputation, right? We have the King James official version of what happened at the disputation in Barcelona in 1263, from James I of Aragon's, court chronicles, whatever it is, right? And either way, we don't know exactly what happened to the Ramban, but 7 years later, the Ramban finds himself in Jerusalem. So we can pretty much guess what happened to the Ramban, which is the guy run out of town, right? Which might be an indicator that he won the disputation. Either way, the Ramban comes to Jerusalem, apropos Yom Yerushalayim in 1270, and he writes a letter saying that he gets to Jerusalem and he can't find a minyan. Right? In other words, he said, and he cries about, he said he was so sure he would come to Jerusalem and everything would be awesome, and instead, he can't even find a minyan to daven in. And eventually he makes his way up north, and that's where he dies. Either way, and that's when you go to the Beit Knesset HaRamban in the old city. That's why it's named the Beit Knesset HaRamban, because that's one of the first testimonies we have of, one of the Rishonim, being mamash there. Okay. Either way, the Ramban in his Torah Adam says, "Nahagu miktzat hachachamim." Listen closely. Lahakel b'knisat beit hamishte. Some chachamim were mekel. This is not the amcha, right? He says the chachamim to go to parties and weddings ostensibly. Ulahasev sham b'shat simcha b'shat seuda. They would sit there, right? They would go to the wedding. And not like we do today that we have a job or something like that. They would actually participate in the wedding. Omrim, sorry. Shelo asru ela le'echol imahem b'mishteh. Al l'knisa bilvad muteret. To go to the Beit Mishteh is not a problem. Here we've been able to isolate, so to speak, if you assume, and again, it's an assumption, but if you assume that that the eating is part of the simcha, so if we can bifurcate, if we can say, I'm in a Beit Simcha, but I'm not being misameach, that would be the heter for these guys. She'ein simcha below achila v'shtira. You see that? I should underline that line. Right, so that the argument is, I can be in the context, right? How would he would say, I can pick up a baby, but I'm not going to crack up. I don't know how he would deal with that. But he says that's what these Miftei Chachamim, he quotes them. That's the Tosafos opinion as well. The Ramban really, really, really doesn't like this. Okay, he's really, really upset at this. He continues, Hilchot Rabbi Yehuda Nasi al Bargaloni, that's Barcelona, Katav Kach. Right, so he quotes Spanish authorities who say, Katav Echad min ha-mechabrim hachi, al kol ha-meitim soed b'beit ha-mishteh la'achar shloshim. One of the authors said that for anybody you can go to a Beit ha-mishteh, to a party after shloshim, al aviv v'imo la'achar 12 chodesh. He says, even though it says you can only go to a Beit HaMishteh after 12 months, he says what people do is okay, so nowadays, first thing here you see, before we get to the Ramban's taking this opinion apart, this is based on one of the heterim. In other words, we use this as based on one of the heterim. If people need to go to weddings during Yud Bet Chodesh, right? Some people use it not to go to weddings, but people go during the Shnat aveilut. We say just don't sit at the table, don't eat with them. Some people don't go at all. He says, yes, I think this is kind of cynical for the next couple of lines. He says, I don't understand. How can you could say you can go and not eat. So why did they allow you to do reciprocity? Right? Forget about reciprocity. Let's say someone initiates, it's the first time they're inviting you.
Yeah.
What can you do? Ya'aselahem mishteh, right? It says, right? You don't need to have reciprocity. He says, even in a regular case, let's just make a party. If someone invites you to a party and it's not reciprocity, even if they're initiating, just go and don't eat. Right? You understand? I think he's saying it very cynically. He's saying, it's one thing to say, he says, I understand, I acknowledge it doesn't appear in the Gemara, but I don't understand. Just go, right? Just go and don't eat. He says, okay, I can answer that question by saying, if the guy initiates it and he invites you the first time to your house, that would also be, it wouldn't be appropriate to show up at his house and not eat at all. Right here you see things that we talk about all the time. Yeah. Right? But he says, Mistabra, he says, I don't get this at all. Mistabra makes a lot more sense to not say like the El Bargaloni and like the Tosafos, but rather Asur likanes lebeit hasimcha vein lachila vein likanes sham shashem oskim b'mizmutei katan v'kala she'ein key words she'ein aveilut b'makom simcha. Wow. So here we have a totally different definition, right? And here we have a good, again, like I said, the best way to test it. Is this a din in simcha? If it's a din in simcha, right, then we understand why obligation, the reciprocity would be, relieved. And then we might very well come to the conclusion of the Tosafos and the Rav Yehuda Bar Galoni that you can go to a place as long as you're not mesamech, on the assumption, again, with the caveat that eating is the simcha. On the other hand, if you hold this is not a din of simcha, but it's a din of context, it's a din of beit simcha, right? You remember, like we talked about when it came to learning Torah, right? One of the reasons you're not allowed to learn Torah, remember we said, it's a din of simcha studying Torah. And then we said there might even be a din of other people learning in your house when you're in Avel. You remember that? We talked about the base Avel having a certain context to it, where we don't want learning going on in the base Avel, in the Beit Avel. Here we're saying there's a din called Beit Simcha, right? Makom Simcha. We don't want you in the Makom Simcha. It's a very, very different halacha that we don't want you being misameach. Right? It's not a din in the Gavra. But it's not you think you're gonna break the simcha. I don't think it's about what you're gonna. You could think about that. Then it suggests that maybe you're gonna break the simcha. Right. I think what he means is that that we don't want you there. It's just not appropriate.
That's
There's a
definitely
clash.
simple reading.
There's a clash
Yeah.
between you being there, and therefore it's there. It's the space that's inappropriate, right? And he even makes an association. He says, "Let me give you an example." Remember this all the way at the beginning. Avel eino nohag aveilut beregel. D'chtiv v'samachta b'chagecha. And Avel can't have aveilut on regel, right? Da'alma yemei simcha lav yemei aveilut. Yemei aveilut lav yemei simcha. We quoted this once before. In other words, there's just a clash. These two things cannot coexist by definition. They cannot coexist, and therefore you cannot be there. It's prohibited to be there. I don't care about your motivation. I don't care about your actions. None of them are appropriate. That's the position of the Ramban, as opposed to the Tosafos, who say, no. It's much more about your personal feeling we're trying to control.
Yeah.
Right? You understand? Your personal feeling. So if you can go to a wedding as long as you don't eat. Right? The Ramban says absolutely not. You can't go to a wedding. The very definition of going to a wedding is antithetical to what the Torah, what the Chachamim are interested in terms of setting up your aveilut. Okay? So then he adds a point at the end, which is kind of interesting. He says, he gives another example. I don't know if you remember this, but we talked about Eima Arvin Simcha B'Simcha. We talked about the third week or the second week of this year. Eima Arvin Simcha B'Simcha. And one of the things the Gemara in Sukkah says is, I don't understand, right? And one of the reasons you can't get married on Sukkot is because where are they going to sleep? It's inappropriate, right? Where are they going to sleep together? In the Sukkah, it's outdoors, whatever. So the Gemara says, right? In other words, we don't understand, right? Let them eat in the sukkah and then let them go upstairs to their room and sleep, right? The kula shmaita hata mashma the simcha the katan bar me'achila the sudahu, right? It sounds like the simcha of a katan is independent of the suuda. Sorry, here he makes a different point. Okay, this is irrelevant. I thought this was relevant to our discussion. It's not. Okay, that's a separate point. Okay, either way, we have two models now. We have the model again within the Ramban. And so what we talked about at the beginning was the issue of what's the nature of this din of payback. Why is payback mutter? And we saw that maybe it's a din of davar avod, maybe it's a din of motivation, right? It's not a din of simcha, right? You're not being sameach there. You won't be sameach there. That raised the question in general about why can't you go to happy occasions, right? And we said it could be for one of two reasons. Either because we don't want you, the two contexts are inappropriate, they don't mix, right? You cannot possibly, or we talked about your personal feeling, right? The best way to test this is what if you could go to a place and not be misameach? The Tosafos says, yeah, you can go to a place and not be misameach. Just go and eat on this, don't eat, right? And even, right, the Ramban says that's not true, right? If you go to a place, even if you don't eat, it's a problem. Not only because of kavod issues. He says because there's a clash between the Beit Simcha, right? The makom simcha is not a makom of aveilut, right? It's a formal din. That's how I would call it. It's a formal halacha, right? We don't care about motivation and feeling, etc. It's just these two things cannot coexist. Just like, right, the connection he makes, just like aveilut and cholamoy can't coexist. What do you mean? Just an aveilut cholamoy, just have aveilut. What's the big deal? But you can't. You just can't do that. You just can't do that. I think I mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago that story about the maid late at the brisker rub. They told them you have to wait 24 hours and then your aveilut is over. I remember 1 week. I don't remember exactly what it was, but the brisker rub. They said, okay, 24 hours. And I said, okay, now I can be happy. Something like that. It's okay, it's the halacha, determined for it. So again, these are two issues in terms of how we understand the reciprocity, which again, I didn't see poskim today dealing with this so much, but certainly the issue of going to weddings and sitting on the side and not eating, that is 100% the machloket rishonim. It reflects this issue. For the Ramban, you can't go. For the Tosafos and Rav Yehuda Bar Galoni, you can go, just don't eat. Right? Halach l'maisa, again, we give people jobs and stuff like that, but again, it's all based on the text that I just read. That is the source. And again, note that it doesn't appear in the Gemara at all. Right? The Gemara talks about simcha mereyut as reciprocity, right? Going to friends' houses, etc. It doesn't talk about weddings so much. Okay? Another way to test this is whether I could eat with the staff. What if I eat at a wedding, but I eat with the staff at the wedding? Or I eat a separate, what we would call a separate table. I eat with the band. Right?
This is all part of making you a waiter.
Right. Okay, right. We're slowly getting there, right? So the Mordechai quotes, this is on the right-hand source. Mordechai to Rabbeinu Tuvia, I don't know who that is. He said, eat with the band. Okay? That's what he said. The Beit Yosef quotes, V'sma katav Rabbi Yehuda of Rav Yosef, B'pir Rabbeinu Tam, V'ri hayu matim lavo lesudat katan. Right now, that's what we quoted before. Rabbi Yehuda Bar Bagloni, they would allow you to come to a sudat katan. Achen matzah katov harav Yosef perik batra moed katan. Asur likanes lebeit hasimcha kegon sudat erusin v'sisuin lechol beni machatan beni mamishamshi. So here, again, you might argue this is a different source. You might say it's the same source as we saw before. But here, what if you, in other words, we saw before, can you go and not eat? The Tosafos said you can go and just not eat. The Ramban said you can't go at all. Here you have Machloket Rabbeinu Tuvia and the Rav Yosef. I don't know who that is. Maybe it's Rav Yosef Tuvelim. Who whether you can eat with the waiters or with the band or something like that. Again, if you say like the Ramban, you wouldn't be open to this at all. If you say like the Tosafos, maybe you could extend it. Right, Tosafos said the simcha is eating.
Yeah.
Here we have a different approach. The simcha is not eating. The simcha is eating with the guests. But if you're sitting at the band's table, or you're sitting at a table outside, or something like that, that already would be mutter as well. So we could expand. Again, the reason I bring this up is just to show you that even though the Tosafos took a strong position, don't eat. But in some of the Rishonim, you can have eat but. Right, you understand? In other words, we can even extend it more than that. So again, if most of you came to this morning thinking, hey, Farber's going to tell us we can't go to weddings at all. Now you see that according to the Tosafos, you can go and not eat. And according to Rabbeinu Tuvia, you can go and just eat with the band, right? And again, the Beit Yosef quotes these both. We'll see where we get to in the Shulchan Aruch in just a couple of minutes. Okay. What about? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in like you kind of set up this dichotomy, right, of like subjective, objective. Maybe it's like legal formalism, legal realism,
right?
In the way you said it. But a lot of these examples, like one of the undercurrents seems to be how it will look to others, right? Like even in the baby example, it's because of how it will look to the bria, you know.
Well, again, like I said, I noted from the beginning because I didn't want to take that to a certain extent off the table. Because I noted that even though the Gemara says you can't pick up a baby because it's simcha and it'll bring you the schok, because how it will look to others, the Shulchan Aruch drops that last line. Right? I noted that he just ignores it. Right? Again, I'll just show you, right? When he gets to the Shulchan Aruch,
yeah,
right, he says, Aval aser b'chol simcha, sorry. Aval aser b'simcha, if lo yikach tinok b'chayko, kol shiva shema yavo l'dei schok. It's about your subjective experience. It's not about what other people will say. Right? It could be that debate is exactly our issue. It could be. I'm not 100% sure of this, but I would raise it as a possibility, which is to say, Nick, that if you're concerned about other people, then then the context is a problem, right? Then it's a din in the subject, in the objective reality. We don't want other people thinking. We don't want you around what other people around
doesn't
you
look
when you're
right
holding a
for
baby,
you to be at a simcha, right?
as opposed to just your stroke itself. It could be, but I'm not 100% convinced of that. Okay. Let's go on just a little more. I have a couple more sources that are interesting in this fashion, even though I think this is very compelling. I think I've made a compelling case for this. I'll skip this for now. Let me just show you the Tosafot, because this is kind of considered the main text. Some of the stuff we've touched upon, well, this is just lahashlim. I just want to make sure you know this Tosafot exists. So Tosafot says the simcha mereud, perish b'kuntrus sudat shosim re'im va'ovim zelazeh. Right? Simchat Mereu, that's the reciprocal parties that people make for each other. Right? It's all again, I don't know how to say this because it's outrageous because all the questions, right? 90% of the questions that I get in aveilut are, can I go to this wedding? I go to the bar mitzvah, go to the bris, go to the pidyon aven, right? All those things. And none of them appear in the Gemara. The only thing that appears in the Gemara is Simchat Mereu, which is friends inviting each other over on Thursday nights for the barbecue, for the weekly, the monthly, the Shabbos Mavarchim pre-barbecue. You know what I'm saying? That's what appears in the Gemara. It's all an inference, right? Right? And then they say, that's what we saw already. You can go in for Simchat Mereu for the reciprocal even immediately. Katan Irina, Damrina Birushalmi, sorry, Damrina Birushalmi. Okay, let's skip that. That's not important for us now. Uvmasechet Smachot. This is we saw in the Ravid, and now we're going to see it again. Imayasu dashel mitzvah mutar. Says the Tosfot, right? We saw that in the Ravid already. Lo yadanu mau korei silat mitzvah lahatir ava. Tosfot says, what the heck is that? Whereas that we have another source that says that Simchat Surah mitzvah is mutar. So Tosfot says, let me give you a few suggestions. Im dafka sudat kiddush rosh chodesh, right? Maybe it means the siddur they used to make. I don't know what this is. But they used to apparently make a suda when they made kiddush rosh chodesh, when they sanctified the new month. Maybe some of the other sources talk about, maybe it means Korban Pesach or something like that, but that's not relevant to us. Then he says, Perush Hara'a b'shem Hara'a is Rabbeinu Chanan, I think, b'shem Rabbeinu Shimshon, de lesudat brit milah mutar likanes, de lo chashiva simcha. Here we have a second indicator, or third indicator of our question, what Nick called the subjective-objective distinction. Is this about your personal experience, or is it about the Beit Simcha? How would you view a Brit Milah, a house of a Brit Milah? Sudat Brit Milah mutar likanes. Don't worry, I'm getting to the crescendo. The crescendo is the Ramah. Don't worry. And some of the ways the Ramah was taken. That's the fourth approach. Says the Tosafot that the Sudat Brit Milah is mutar likanes. De lo chashiva simcha. You can go to a house of a Brit Milah because it's not considered simcha. Why not? Kedamrin and Perakama the Ketubot. De lo mevarchin al basha simcha bimono. Since we don't make a bracha of simcha like we do at a wedding or shavar bracha shasimcha bimono. Mishum de tride, because you're very concerned about the health of the baby. Veleka simcha. So Tosfos gives two reasons, even though he doesn't call them two, about why a Brit Milah is different. One, he says there's pain there, there's concern there, there's health issues there. And secondly, we don't objectively make a bracha of shasimcha bimono. Both of those or one of those independently is enough to basically not define it as a house of simcha, right? And because of that, anybody who's an avel can go, apparently. Anybody who's an avel can go, right? Then he says, Ulahara, lo haya pashut. I cut off a line. Degara misimchat, right? Lo haya pashut, degara misimchat. I think he says in the Tosfot. I don't have the Tosfot in front of me now, but you can look at I cut off a word here. But you have it in the Tosfot. Very quickly, this is on Tosfot on Kaf Bet. Just 1 second. Let me just pull up the Tosfot here. Danny has in here. Here. Does Tosfot continue here? No. Right. The Gar Misimcha Mereu. He says, I don't know why this would be any less than Simchat Mereu. Sorry. The Gar Misimchat Mereu. Sorry about that. Fix it online. Right? In other words, why would it be any less? So here we have a debate whether you can go to a Brit Milah or not, because the event that's happening is a different type of event. Right? It's not an event objectively defined as Simcha. Right? According to one opinion. Yeah. So this, of course, could be just a question of how we don't, what Brit Milah is. That's totally possible, right? On the other hand, we might come back to our distinction, right? And say, hey, going to a Brit Milah, it might be us. In other words, he quotes it in Danny's Tosfot when it says Rabbi Elazar. I said it was Rabbi Chanan. Okay, let's go Rabbi Elazar. Tosfot Rabbi Elazar. He says, I don't know why there's any difference in Simchat Mereu. What does he mean there? Does he mean that this event is again, it could tell you something about Brit Milah. Is Brit Milah yes or no, right? It could be binary about that, and that's one certain possible reading. The other way is to say is, when I come to a Brit Milah, right, and it's not my kid, I just want to make it clear, it's not my kid, right? Yeah. Then is that, right? So I'm going for the simcha purposes. I'm sitting down for the simcha purposes. I understand the family's concerned a little about that. On the other hand, it's not a Beit Simcha per se. It might go the other direction of what we said before. Do you understand? Yeah. Before we said, you go to a place that's objectively defined as a Beit Simcha, but you're not going to participate in the simcha because you're going to eat on the side. That's the Tosfot's opinion. Here we have, you're going to a place that might not definitionally be defined as a Beit Simcha, but you're going there for simcha purposes. Yeah. And we have a machloket about it. So that's also, so if the din is, you're not supposed to engage in simcha, so then maybe you shouldn't go. On the other hand, if the din is that you're not supposed to be in a Beit Simcha, then hey, maybe then you could go, right? So you see, this is a way of testing it, but the other way around, right? In other words, here there's a subjective experience that is Simcha, but the objective reality is that there's no Simcha. You follow? Yeah. So that might be the opposite case of what we saw. So again, we have these two models.
Hold the baby at a bris.
What's that?
Can you hold
the baby at a bris? Right, that's a good thing. That's a good question. Okay, I just want to throw in quickly before we get to the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah's famous thing that is that it gets all the Achronim to explode about. Just three quick sources that are interesting. The Rama quotes, not in the Rama on the Shulchan Aruch, but in his commentary on the Beit Yosef, he talks about himself. This is something that most people don't quote. He talks about Karya Ma'aseh al Yadi. He says about himself. When his mother died, the Rama. So here we're talking about the 1500s. And he says, this is maybe just, I felt close to this source because I'm a rabbi. He says, he says, not only did I go to a wedding, but during, I think he's talking about during Shiva. He says, I'm not sure if he's talking about during Shiva right now. Not sure if he's talking about during Shiva. He says, I was an Avel on my mother, and I made Birchas Hayusin Tachat HaChupah, Kederach Sharav Hayim Mevarach Birchat Hayusin, V'savachti al Maharam Mipadua, V'katavti Hadvarim La'Gaon Marino. Sorry, I trusted the Maharam. I wrote to the Mayor Mipadua V'iskim al Yadai. Ach katav sheyesh mekomot shenogin la'achmir harbe bedin avelut. Ben avel lo likra b'Torah kol shnei masar chodesh b'Shabbat. Right, we don't give an avel. Right, this is for Danny. We don't give an avel in Aliyah. Machmir gam bezeh shomdim b'chutz. Ve'ni chassan lebeit hayusin. They don't go to weddings. Aval inyan halacha dina habi kemo shekatavti. Says, I think you can go. Right? In other words, if they're the shushbanin, if they walk in, okay, so he says the rabbi can participate, and if the people have a job, they can participate. If they're helping the katan v'kala, they can participate. But again, I like the Rama himself who says that even though I was disagreeing, I did it myself. I like rabbis who talk about what they did themselves. Okay? What about parents? That's the rabbi. What about parents coming to a wedding during Shiva? So Rav Moshe has a very famous tshuva about this. He's b'davar avia kala v'ya katan shaya aval tocha shiva sheshamu mimeni sha'av mutar lalech lechupat bito ulechupat beno. Rav Moshe says people are talking, spreading the rumor, the vicious rumor about me that I said that a parent can go to a wedding of his child or her child during Shiva. That vicious rumor is true, says Rav Moshe. Asher katav yedidi sheyeshim atmim al zev ratzal adat hamakor. They said, Rav Moshe, where'd you get that from? So he says, I quote a Marashah, again, what's important about this tshuva is not, he says, people assume that I mean that it, right? Right, no, it's if the child died, let's say the mother died and the father wants to go to the chuppah, so the child can go to his own wedding, that's true. Right, but then it would be obvious the father could go. Let's say it's somebody else, right? Let's say, can the father go to his son's wedding when it's the daughter-in-law who's sitting Shiva? That for sure you could do. Right? No, he says, for sure I'm talking about when the father himself is an Avel, he could still go. Right? And he says, and he writes, okay, why is this important? He says you can go in general if it's hefsed. In other words, if the wedding's paid for, etc., you're not going to lose money on the wedding. But then he says, so why do I allow the father to go, even if he's not going to lose any money? Upashut, this is the key line for me. Shu adin shemutar lichnos lechubat beno. Vatam pashut. Ditzar gadol kazeh. Not being at your child's wedding. Shelo liot al chupat bito beno. Adifu mi hefsed mamon. He says, this is davar ha'avid par excellence. Don't think davar ha'avid is a financial loss. It's also a psychological loss. Not being there is a davar ha'avid. Right? Parents fly to Israel to go to their kids' weddings. So you see how many, right? He says siblings he would be more skeptical about whether the tsar is gadol. But he says for sure there's enormous amount of psychological pain. And again, maybe today we would say that you could even extend it to siblings. But he says if the sibling is sitting Shiva for somebody, again, you could figure that out, figure out the details. This is debatable. The Shevet Levi Rav Wosner didn't like this psak at all. He says Nishalti, right? He's a rabbi. He was a rabbi in Bnei Brak. He died a few years ago. Nishalti meaning Av Shu Avel. What's Bet Mem? Avel. Not sure what Bet Mem is. Toch Shiva. Ben Mishpachto. Avel Ben Mishpachto Toch Shiva. ובנו מתחתן תוך שבעה ללכת לחופה שבזה אנחנו מחמירים על פי פשטות השולחן ערוך אינו יוצא לשמוע חופה, right? ומה שכתב רמה שם, we'll see that in a minute, יוצא בלילה לצורך, היינו לצורך ממש, כהפסד ממון וכי יוצא בזה. Okay, so the Rav Wosner is against it. So we have a chugad achronim whether you can go to your child's wedding. Generally, in America, we pass them like Rav Moshe in this case, and I think most people in Israel do this also. It's hard to do. Okay, halacha l'maisa. How do we do all this? So here we get to the final thing for today, which is the Ramah's position. The Ramah introduces something that will be the fourth indicator. Right? We talked about the reciprocity issue on the subjective objective. We talked about when we could separate the issues out. Right? If you go to a wedding and you don't eat, we saw three opinions there. And then we talked, right, whether you can eat, not go to the wedding, or go and not eat, Tosva. Don't go, Ramban. Go and eat with the Mishamshin, right, with the waiters, right? That was an expansion. That was one area. And then we saw also a machloket. What was the other thing about where we could separate it out? Oh, right, a house of a Brit Milah, right, where, again, when you go, you're going for simcha, even though the house of the Brit Milah is not a beit simcha because they're concerned about the health as well. So if you hold that it's an objective reality, then you could know, according to the Ramban, because hey, the house is not a house of simcha. On the other hand, if you're going to be misamech, then you probably couldn't eat, right? In other words, you shouldn't go and eat. So that was the opposite. Then we saw a couple of, I just wanted to tie up some loose ends in terms of the father going. When we get to the Shulchan Aruch, so we talked about the first halacha and the dropping of the other people holding a baby. Here's the main halacha. You can go to a house of simcha after 30 days. Only after a year. Okay, we didn't talk about that, but after Shana Muberet is also 12 months. Miyad means miyad, not like the rush, miyad achar shiva, not like the bachar at the tool. If you don't have to do it, if there's no reciprocity, then only after 30 days. Sorry, I lost the place here. Right, no, it's parents, it's the strange din that we started with. You can't even do it. Right, you have to wait the full 12 months, even if it's lifroa. This is where the Ravid introduced that for purposes of mitzvah, where it's when there's a different motivation. You're not going for the simcha, you're going because right, it's not a sudat Rosh Chodesh like the Tosfot talked about. It's the yatom v'almana. Then l'shem shamayim, right? You're not going l'shem mitzvah, you're going l'shem simcha, you're going l'shem shamayim. It's not clear if he means that the atom of the almana, the atom of the yatoma won't get married or something else. Okay, says continues. What if you have a suda mitzvah? There's no simcha. What do the guys go? We go pidyon raben or suda brit milah. You can even go to a bris. You can even eat there according to Shulchan Aruch. Here's the Ramah. Says the Ramah, you have to be in your house. You can't leave your house.
A fancy trick.
Right? Some people say even in your house. So to be clear, the Ramah differentiates between your house, every place else. Anything that's not your house, right? Somehow there's a dissonance, and maybe this is the best expression of it. There's a dissonance between a beit simcha and your own house. Because your house can't turn into a beit simcha. Do a wedding in your house, that's also okay. Right? So it's a very simple solution. Not everybody likes this. It's a very simple solution. Just do the bris in your house. And then you can have it even during Shiva. You can have it. You can't go out to a Beit Mishteh. So this is the crystallized expression of it has nothing to do with the subjective reality. It's all a subjective reality. It's all about objective. Right? When you go someplace else, that's a Beit Simcha. But your personal house precludes Beit Simcha. I brought a book here because I want to introduce a new book. This is a book, I don't know if you can see, called the Pnei Baruch. There's a number of books that were written before Rabbi Lamb's book, Jewish Read Aloud Death and Mourning. So there was a book in America called the Kolbo. This book was printed in Bnei Brak by a guy named Goldberg. And he says, he has this line here, where he says, I hope I can find it. Oh, I brought it in the sheet. I'm sorry, I brought it in the sheet. I copied it. Right? He says, that this is the last one. That's quoting the Ramah. Right? That should be nisuin. That's his conclusion. Nisuin yesh lachmir. And then he says, Shamati migdolei hora'ah. I heard from some shemekilin gam besudat sheva brachot. Kish hi bebeitam. That's my bad typing. But right, besudat shiva sheva. In other words, you can even do a sheva brachos in your house during shiva.
At your place.
At your place. Rabbi Willig, Rabbi Miller, they don't like this. They find this very objectionable. You can do a sheva brachos in your house. But how can you make such a conclusion? Well, if your house precludes a Beit
Precludes a Beit
Simcha,
Simcha.
then why is it any different, right, than going to a place where there's no Simcha? Right, this is the clearest expression of what I was trying to say before, that maybe there's a din of bayis, and your house doesn't allow a Beit Simcha to take place. Okay, so we talked about the objective and the subjective. Since I see my son is leaving, I'm going to end the show right now so I can say goodbye. But have a good week. Again, there's the dinim of Beit Simcha. Next week, of course, we will not have shir. Hashem, hopefully we'll be able to pick up in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. Happy Yom Yerushalayim and Chag Sameach.
Thank you.
Sameach.